The Florida sun hit the top of my head as I stepped onto the curb outside Terminal C, suitcase wheels rattling behind me. I'd worn my nicest blouse, the one with the delicate embroidery my sister gave me for my 60th. The kind you save for something worth remembering. Today was supposed to be that kind of day. Elias was already unloading the kids' bags from the trunk. They waved at me from the sidewalk, Lily and Marco excited and sugar hyper from the road trip snacks. Brielle stood by the check-in counter, nails perfectly polished, phone in hand, barely glancing up. "I can't believe we're finally doing this," I said, forcing a smile as I walked toward them. I'd helped Elias put aside money for this cruise, suggested it even, a memory-making trip. One last family adventure before the kids got too old to care. Brielle didn't look up. "Leona, can I see your ticket?" I reached into my purse only to freeze. I'd triple-checked the confirmation. I handed her the printed page. She scanned it, then turned to the cruise clerk. "This name's not showing up on the manifest." The clerk gave me a polite, confused look. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't listed under this reservation." Brielle gave a theatrical gasp, hand over heart. "Oh, shoot. I must have forgotten to include her when I booked the family tickets. You know how these systems are. One wrong click." I opened my mouth, but she cut me off with a tilt of her head and a smirk. "Honestly, these cruises aren't really designed for people who clip coupons." Lily's face dropped. Marco clutched my hand. Elias stared at the asphalt. I felt it again, that cold, familiar sensation of being unwanted. The kind that settles in your chest like old smoke. Years of birthdays, skipped holidays handled at arm's length. Always a little too much, or never quite enough. But today I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled, calm, measured. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd already decided this would be the last time she caught me off guard. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The number was still there, unused but never deleted. As I stepped a few feet away from the group, I pressed call and held the phone to my ear. "Captain Delgado," I said softly. "This is Leona Carlisle. I think it's time." 3 years ago, the office floors creaked beneath my shoes as I set out folding chairs for another after-school session. The old community center in West Palm Beach smelled like dust-dried paint and hope. That day, a quiet girl waited in the hallway, shoulders hunched, backpack too big for her frame eyes, hollowed by something more than exhaustion. Her name was Camila Delgado. 17. Top grades. No money left. Her mother had been diagnosed with lymphoma 2 weeks prior. Her father, a cruise ship captain, had drained their savings for medical bills and flights home between deployments. Tuition for Camilla's first semester at Florida Gulf Coast was slipping through their fingers. "I'll find a way," she said, voice barely audible. "You don't have to do it alone," I replied. I sat with her every week. We rewrote essays. I called nonprofits. I found a foundation that offered scholarships for children of maritime workers. She got it, just barely. I dropped off groceries during her mom's chemo weeks. No one asked me to. It just felt like the right thing. Her father, Captain Mateo Delgado, called once to thank me. I wrote his number on the back of a sticky note and tucked it into my drawer. I never used it. Until now. "Captain Delgado," I said again, steadying my voice. "This is Leona Carlisle. I'm at the Miami port. Something's come up." There was a pause. Then warmth. "Ms. Carlisle, I've been hoping to hear from you again. My Camilla still talks about you. How's everything? I wish I were calling just to catch up." I explained briefly. I didn't need to embellish. The captain heard what mattered in my silence. "I'm docked on the Odyssey Pearl Terminal C," he said. "Wait right there. I'll be down in 5. I ended the call and turned back toward the group. Brielle was talking to the cruise agent again, spinning some story. Elias looked like he'd aged a year in 10 minutes. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just stood there, phone in hand, heart steady, as I waited for the man in the white uniform to come through the crowd. It didn't take long. The buzz of the terminal dimmed when the automatic doors parted and two figures stepped through. Captain Delgado moved like someone who didn't need to speak to command a room. Beside him walked a young woman in a crisp white coat, medical badge, clipped neatly to her lapel. Her steps quickened the moment she saw me. Ms. Carlyle, Camilla's voice cracked through the terminal noise as she rushed toward me, arms wide. "I can't believe it's really you!" We hugged tightly, the kind of embrace that doesn't just recall a memory, it anchors it. "You're the reason I'm here," she whispered. I never forgot. I looked over her shoulder in time to catch Brielle's smile freeze mid-sentence. She blinked once, twice. Elias turned to me and said, under his breath, "What is happening?" Captain Delgado stepped forward, nodding respectfully before extending his hand. "Ms. Carlyle, it's a true pleasure. My daughter wouldn't be Dr. Delgado if it weren't for you." I shook his hand, my voice quiet but firm. She earned every bit of it. He turned to the check-in desk, his voice amplifying. "Ms. Carlyle will not need processing through this line. She is a personal guest of mine and the ship's honored guest this week." Gasps rippled. Even the attendant's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Brielle's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Elias like he might explain anything. "I didn't know," he muttered, eyes flicking to me, searching for answers that I wasn't ready to give. Captain Delgado gestured gallantly. "Shall we escort you aboard, Miss Carlyle?" I gave a nod and took a step forward. I didn't look at Brielle as I passed, but I felt her eyes trailing me like a question she never thought she'd need to ask. Camilla took one arm, the captain the other, and together we walked toward the boarding ramp, past the velvet ropes, past the suspicion, past the smallness they had tried to wrap around me for years. As we reached the threshold, I exhaled. Not out of relief, but out of something more precise, readiness, because there was more they didn't know. And it was time. I used to joke that my real job title should have been professional root grower. No one ever saw the work I did, just the blooms that showed up later in someone else's story. 23 students. I still remember each name. Single mothers, foster kids, immigrant teens, veterans' children. Bright, hungry minds in quiet despair. At the West Palm Center, I helped them all write their first resumes, walked them through FAFSA, coached them through mock interviews with trembling voices and shaky hands. We didn't have much funding, but we had grit and borrowed Wi-Fi, and sometimes that was enough. When the center closed, they called it a strategic budget reallocation. What they meant was your work matters, but not enough to keep the lights on. I didn't fight it. I just packed up the binders, copied every resume I'd helped shape, and reached out to the few connections I had left. One was Captain Delgado. I sent over a folder of candidate profiles, each stamped with recommendation letters I wrote in the quiet of my kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. I never added mine to the stack. Let the kids go first. I'll figure myself out later. Elias never knew. I'd planned to tell him, but every time I tried, Brielle's voice would echo in my mind, something biting about people who live off charity or using family connections like a safety net. I swallowed my updates and said I was doing some freelance community advising as if that were a thing. Now standing in the grand entryway of the ship, I watched Camilla turn to my son and his wife, who had finally boarded behind us. She didn't just save me, Camilla said, her voice unwavering. She changed dozens of lives. Brielle blinked fast as if trying to place me in this new context. Elias looked as though the floor had dropped beneath him. "You're talking about my mom?" he asked softly. Camilla nodded. "Yes. Your mother gave without keeping score. She gave when she had nothing to gain." The hallway grew quiet around us. Even the polished floors seemed to hold their breath. I straightened my shoulders, not out of pride, but out of peace. The truth had a way of rising, even when buried deep under years of polite silence. And as we turned the corner, Camilla handed me a folded note, smiling. "Dinner tonight. Some people want to thank you in person." When Camilla opened the suite door, I stood still for a moment, unsure if I'd walked into a hotel brochure or someone else's life. The view stretched endlessly over the Atlantic, and a welcome basket sat on the table beside a handwritten card. "Dinner tonight. Some people want to thank you." The handwriting was unmistakably Camilla's. I took my time getting ready. Not out of vanity, but reverence. I wasn't dressing for elegance, I was dressing for memory. I wore the navy blue blouse my students once pooled money to buy me at the end of a scholarship season. It had always been too nice for everyday use. When I arrived at the dining hall, Captain Delgado stood waiting at the door. He didn't speak, just rested a hand over his heart and nodded before guiding me inside. The room wasn't crowded, just one long table, white linens, candlelight flickering softly. Then I saw them. Miguel, who once lived in 3 foster homes in 2 years, now wearing the crisp uniform of a junior deck officer. Carmen, the shy girl from the GED class, who now managed onboard events, holding herself like she belonged. They rose one by one. "You got me out of foster care," Miguel said, voice cracking. "You taught me how to shake hands and speak like I mattered," Carmen added. "You stayed after hours to help me study for my nursing entrance exam. You didn't just believe in me, you made me believe in me." 7 of them, all grown, all employed on the ship, all thriving. The words blurred in my ears after a while. Gratitude has a way of sounding the same when it's real, heavy trembling, trying not to crack open in front of others. That's when I noticed Elias and Brielle at the door. They hadn't been invited, but no one stopped them. They stood just long enough to hear Miguel say, "We didn't have parents who showed up." But she did. Brielle shifted uncomfortably. Elias looked at me, not like a man puzzled, but like a boy seeing his mother for the first time. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was long, honest. And as I sat down, hands still shaking, Captain Delgado leaned over and whispered, "They aren't the only ones you've changed." The clinking of silverware faded as a tall man in a dark suit rose from the end of the table. He held his glass lightly, but his voice was firm. "I'm Wesley Grant," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "Vice President of Operations for this fleet." He paused, then turned to me. "I've read a lot of resumes in my life, Ms. Carlyle, but none moved me more than the ones you submitted, not because of what was on paper, but because of what was behind it." I froze, my breath caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. He continued, "Leona Carlyle didn't just help people. She built the blueprint we now use to recruit, train, and elevate community-sourced talent, our current onboard internship model. It came from her spreadsheet, the community outreach framework we're expanding across 4 ports, her letters, her strategy, her ethics." I blinked slowly, trying to process his words. Mr. Grant lifted his glass higher. "And so it's my privilege to announce tonight that we've created a new role, Director of Community Initiatives for the Caribbean Division. And we'd like to offer that position to Ms. Leona Carlyle." A murmur of surprise moved across the table. Miguel nearly dropped his glass. Camilla reached for my hand under the table. "The salary," he added, "is $700-800 a month, plus full benefits and housing allowance. But more importantly, it comes with autonomy to build programs your way." I stared down at my lap. My hands trembled as they gripped the edge of the tablecloth. I hadn't come here asking for recognition. I hadn't come expecting a thing. "You don't owe us a yes right now," Mr. Grant said gently, "but we owe you this opportunity. Because your quiet integrity shaped a legacy we're just beginning to understand." I raised my eyes slowly and met his gaze. It wasn't pride I felt in that moment. It was something deeper, the kind of knowing that settles in your bones after years of being dismissed, the kind of truth no one can take from you, not even the ones who tried to erase it. I looked over at Elias. He was still standing in the back, watching me like he couldn't quite remember how to blink. And then I spoke. Calm, steady, I accept. From somewhere behind me, I heard Brielle whisper I didn't know. Camilla turned to her and answered for me. She didn't need you to. After the applause faded and dessert was served, the air changed. It wasn't tension, it was reckoning. The kind that settles into people's faces when they realize the story they've been telling themselves no longer holds. Brielle approached me outside the dining hall. Her smile was gone, her makeup slightly smudged, like she'd been blinking too hard for too long. I didn't know, she murmured. I thought you were just volunteering. I didn't realize you were running all that. Camilla stepped in from behind me before I could respond. Her voice was cool, not cruel. She was never just anything. That's the problem. You never asked who she was. You assumed who she wasn't. Brielle flinched slightly, but didn't argue. She stepped back, and for once she had no performance left to give. Later, Elias found me standing near the railing on the upper deck. The ocean stretched dark and wide beyond us, and his voice was quiet, as if he feared he might crack something open if he raised it too high. Why didn't you tell me you lost your job? I didn't look at him right away. I watched the waves instead. Because your wife said I was a burden, and I believed that if I told you, she'd use it to prove her point. He didn't deny it. He didn't defend her. I would have helped, he said finally. I know, I replied. But I didn't want help. I wanted dignity. I wanted you to hear about something good, not something desperate. He nodded slowly. I should have asked. I should have paid more attention. A silence passed between us, but it wasn't empty. It held the weight of missed chances and the fragile hope of starting again. You were always working, he said. Always giving. I thought you were fine. I was surviving, I said. That's not the same thing. He looked down his hands in his pockets. I want to do better. If you'll let me. I turned toward him, not angry, not cold, just honest. Then don't defend silence anymore. Not yours, not hers. Start asking. Start listening. He nodded again. This time it felt like something might shift. From the lower deck, I heard my name being called, Camilla's voice light with excitement. She was waving something in her hand. An envelope, another invitation, another door opening. I found her waiting near the solarium, away from the noise, away from the cameras. Brielle stood with her arms crossed, not in defiance this time, but in hesitation. I'm not good at this, she said, eyes low, but I needed to say something. I waited. She took a breath. I misjudged you. I thought you were clinging to us for relevance. I thought you didn't bring value, just wait. I thought I was protecting our image. She met my eyes finally, but I wasn't. I was protecting a lie. I let her words settle. They weren't graceful, but they were real. I didn't need your apology, I said softly. But I appreciate it. She nodded, her voice catching. You're not who I thought you were. I know, I replied. And I forgave you long before this cruise. Relief flickered across her face until I continued. But I don't accept your version of who I am anymore. You don't get to shrink me back down because it's more comfortable. The relief faded into something quieter. She nodded again this time, not as a performance, but as an acknowledgement. We didn't hug. We didn't pretend we were suddenly close. We just stood in the same space for the first time as two women telling the truth. That night, the dining hall was brighter than usual. Every seat filled. Near the captain's table, a small podium stood draped with navy cloth. When it was pulled back, the room hushed. A golden plaque gleamed under the lights. The Leona Carlisle program, advancing education across the seas. Gasps broke the quiet. Someone started clapping, then another, and then it became thunderous. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because something in me felt still, like the world had finally aligned, if only for a moment, to reflect back a truth I had carried alone for too long. Captain Delgado raised his glass. Her name belongs in every port we dock. May the lives she's changed multiply like tides. I looked toward the back of the room. Brielle stood beside Elias, both clapping. Their eyes didn't hold pity or pride, just recognition. Camilla reached for my hand, leaned in, and whispered, "Ready for your next adventure." Camilla and I walked the upper deck just before dawn, the wind soft, the sea calm. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she smiled and said, "You should have had this recognition years ago." I shook my head gently. "Some people inherit money," I said. "I inherited hope and I passed it on. That's enough." She didn't argue. She just nodded like someone who understood the currency I dealt in. Later that afternoon, there was a soft knock on my suite door. When I opened it, Elias stood there with Lily and Marco at his side. His eyes were tired but open in a way they hadn't been in years. "Mom," he said, "I want them to know who you really are." I brought them in. Pulled out the old scrapbook I'd tucked in my luggage out of habit. It wasn't fancy, just pictures and notes, some yellowed with age, others printed from old emails. Each page held a name, a face, a thank you scrawled in ink or typed from a borrowed computer. I sat between my grandchildren and turned the pages. This, I told them, is the family I built, even when others didn't see me. Lily traced a photograph with her finger. Marco pointed to a note from Carmen, written in glitter pen, the way she always signed things in high school. Elias sat back on the couch, watching me, quiet but present. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was something sturdier, the beginning of a recognition that didn't ask me to be smaller, quieter, or invisible. As the kids flipped through the final pages, the sun dipped toward the water. A new day was always waiting just past the edge of the horizon. 6 months later, my mornings begin on different shores. I now oversee youth initiatives in 5 Caribbean ports. Each week brings a new harbor, a new group of students with open hands and untapped potential. I teach workshops on ships, meet local partners on land, and read application essays on overnight crossings. The work is never finished, but it fills me in ways nothing else ever has. Brielle volunteers now quietly. No announcements, no performances, just presence. She helps with intake interviews in Miami and folds uniforms for new recruits. It's not redemption, but it's something. Elias visits more. We don't talk about the past much. We plant things instead. Small gestures, phone calls, shared meals that don't need explaining. This morning, I walked the deck before the ship stirred. Coffee in hand, breeze brushing my cheek. I paused at the railing, watching the horizon stretch like possibility. A young steward passed by and smiled. "Good morning, Director Carlisle." I returned the smile and nodded. "Good morning." I took another sip of coffee, eyes still on the water. I used to be the extra seat I murmured to no one in particular. Now I help build the whole table.